This past summer, a friend of mine recommended a book to me, Lessons in Chemistry. I didn't expect to actually read it, not having read outside of class for some time now, but I found myself on a long plane ride with nothing to do, and I thought, why not give it a try? This book told the story of a female scientist in the 1950s who, after being fired from her day job for getting pregnant, gained fame on a cooking show. It was a powerful story on many counts, but what really stood out to me was how the main character described the process of cooking. To Elizabeth Zott, the kitchen was a lab, and cooking was a scientific process, just with aprons and stoves in the stead of lab coats and Bunsen burners. For most of my life, I've been someone who puts things into categories. There was science and there was cooking, the academic and the non-academic, and they weren't connected. But as I sat there on the plane turning those pages, I realized something. I didn't have to force cooking and science into these different spheres, and I didn't have to choose to value science more than cooking, because they weren't all that different. Instead, I could choose to view them as two equally important parts of one whole. For most of my life, I have had a personal connection to cooking. Growing up, I was surrounded by the food of my mother and my grandmother. I was able to take for granted that not only would I be getting my nutrition, it would be absolutely delicious. This was an incredible thing, and yet I never fully appreciated it. Instead of acknowledging the hard work that these women did, I would find myself comparing their work to the big Silicon Valley tech jobs I was surrounded by. Surely I thought this wasn't as hard or as difficult as getting a job or going to university. Despite these conceptions, I still began to cook and bake myself as I grew older. It started out as something fun, just a hobby to escape from the stress of school. But I didn't know then what I do know now. My kitchen was a lab, and when I cooked, I was just as much of a scientist as I was when I sat in science class. As I learned to cook, I would watch my mother and my grandmother in the kitchen, and I would see them put scientific principles to use every day. My grandmother used biology to ferment her dosa batter, and my mother used chemistry to create the perfect pasta sauce. When I baked, I would also do the same thing. I was using biology and letting the fermentation of the yeast create the gluten, which led to the amazing bread which I made. For me to think that these forces underlying cooking were simple was wrong, because they were the same forces that I learned about in school. Everything from the material of the pan to the order in which the spices were added had been perfected by years of experimentation and science. For me to put cooking into this unimportant category just because it wasn't what I viewed as important at the time was taking away from all of the science and hard work that it takes to make a delicious meal. My own worldview was shutting out huge groups of people from the conversation. In my own family, there are generations of women who didn't have the opportunity to get an education or a job. Instead, all they were able to do is cook. Despite these unfair standards, they were still able to excel at what they did and perfect their own craft. Who was I to say that they had less knowledge than me just because they weren't afforded the same opportunities that I was? In fact, around the world, countless women have not had the opportunity to get a job. Instead, they have been relegated to the home. Despite these repressive standards, these women still find ways to excel in what they do. Just because they may not have access to the education that explains the underlying causes behind what they're doing, it does not mean that they're not grappling with these hard concepts every day. Here at Gunn, we often fall victim to these same ideas, choosing to value our academic knowledge above all else. In doing this, we ignore the point of why we learn, which is to apply it in our everyday lives. We don't need to be the student with straight A's in order to grapple with hard concepts, because these hard concepts are ingrained in everything we do. By creating limits and putting boundaries on what skills we want to uplift, we create a world where entire groups of people's contributions get shut out. Instead, we have to choose to understand the different skills we bring to the table, whether that is the traditional academic intelligence, or it's something more artistic or athletic, or something like my grandmother's craft in the kitchen. Everyone in this room has their own special set of skills, and if we don't limit which of these skills we want to see every day, we can create a world where we all have the opportunity to learn from each other. Everything we do is inherently connected in their own way. So by putting labels and boundaries on the knowledge that we gain, we are creating a world where we aren't all valued. But we don't have to do this. We can choose to appreciate the connections and all of the different skills we have, and we can choose to appreciate each other in everything we do, whether it's working 9 to 5 in a lab or spending arduous hours in a kitchen. Thank you.